Hi everyone, this is Trevor Jones from AstroBackyard, and in this video I'm going head to head with fellow astrophotographer and YouTuber Nico Carver from Nebula Photos. We both bought the exact same astrophotography kit with a simple DSLR camera, and we're going to take our best shot with it, literally. The rules are simple: one night, one deep space object, and one entry-level DSLR camera. The kit we both bought came with two kit lenses, an 18-55 and a 75-300. Now we're both using the same portable star tracker, but I have no idea which kit lens Nico is going to use for his project. So we'll both take an image and we'll share it at the end of the video, and I'll leave it up to you guys to choose which one's the winner. So let me know in the comments whose image you like best. There's plenty of deep space objects that are up for grabs this time of year, but if Nico's smart and he's anything like me, he'll choose a target that's a good fit for this particular stock DSLR camera and the lenses that we're using. I've narrowed my target down to something in the Orion constellation, surprise, surprise, but not something obvious like the Orion Nebula, the Horsehead, or the nearby Rosette. I think for this camera, this stock DSLR camera, something like a reflection nebula would be a better choice. So with that in mind, I'm going to be shooting the hauntingly beautiful Witch's Head Nebula next to the bright star Rigel in Orion. I'm going to use the Canon EF 75-300mm zoom telephoto lens for this project. I think I'm going to set it to about mid-range, around the 130-150mm mark. That should frame the Witch's Head up nicely without asking too much of this little star tracker in these long exposure images. Also, I'm going to stop the lens down to f6.3 from the native 5.6. That's just to sharpen things up a little bit while sacrificing a little bit of that light gathering power. This lens is a really entry-level mediocre lens, and I want to give it the best chance it has at capturing sharp stars throughout the image, edge to edge. It's a race against the clock because I've only got one battery in this new DSLR camera, so I've got one shot to capture my image and collect as much data as I can on a single battery. So the plan is 2-minute exposures at ISO 1600 at around 130mm focal length at f6.3. And I hope that's enough to do this object justice, but of course I won't find out until I bring it onto the computer and process it later, so fingers crossed. Hey Nico, how's it going, man?
Hey, I'm good. I just got back from shooting my deep sky object with the kit.
I did the same. Actually, the turnaround for how quickly we were able to use this setup after it arrived was surprising, especially for the weather I've been getting lately. I actually got to use it, I think it was about 4 days after it arrived.
It was also just good timing because it was a night where I got in my imaging time before the moon rose, 9 p.m. to midnight, and that was right before the moon rose at around 1 a.m.
Nice. Yeah, I think I did the day before you, and because the moon rose at about 12:30, same sort of deal, which worked out well because the battery died on me after about 3 hours of shooting because it was so cold out there.
Yeah, me too. I sort of came in expecting the battery to be short-lived because it looked like a pretty small battery, and sometimes I can get a full night of imaging on a DSLR battery, but this one I was sort of expecting like 2 to 3 hours is going to be it.
I think we should talk about the planning in our selection process for the images we took, because I don't know about you, but I had a lot of pressure to really get a great image in a new way than ever before. Like normally, I always want to take great images, but knowing we were going to do this challenge and I had one night to do it, I really wanted to get it right. So I did a lot of planning before my shoot. How about you?
Definitely, yeah. I did a lot of thinking about, what field I wanted to capture, because I always like to, especially when you're going sort of wide, like I was planning to, make sure that there's something else interesting in the field, be it star patterns or something other than just your main object. And so that was the first thing, is just sort of what field. But then my second thing was I wanted a really bright star in the field, because I knew that with a lens like this especially, you want to check focus often, and because it can lose focus at any time. And so I wanted a bright star in the field so that I could just pop on the Badenov mask, check focus, take it back off.
That's such a great tip for anyone watching. And it's something you wouldn't necessarily think of, but it is so handy to have a bright star to refocus on in the field of view, because of course you could slew to one, but then there's all those challenges of reframing up your target on a non-go-to mount, like a little star tracker. Getting that matched up would be, you'd never get it exactly right. So being able to leave it in the same field of view and use that bright star to focus on is a smart move. And I did the exact same thing. So it's funny to hear that you did that too. There were so many potential combinations of targets that you could have shot at this focal length. I mean, 75 to 300. So I'm so interested to not only see the focal length that you chose to shoot at and which lens, but also how you group targets if you did that as well.
There's just so many considerations for picking a focal length. I mean, I'm sure the lens has a sweet spot optically, but I didn't really even think about that. I mostly just thought, I'm on a star tracker, so I'm not gonna go to 300 millimeters, because I'm pretty conservative on a star tracker, and I wanna do long exposures. So at 300 millimeters, you might have to toss a bunch of exposures. You're gonna have to maybe limit yourself unless you get a really perfect polar alignment. So I could rule out some focal lengths sort of right away. I was thinking like, oh, it'd be cool to go really wide. Maybe Trevor wouldn't expect that, but the time to go really wide, I think, is Milky Way core season.
I had that same logic. So if it were the summer and it were Milky Way core season, chances are I probably would have used that 18 to 55 millimeter kit lens. But to me, the 75 to 300 this time of year made the most sense. And as for tapping into that full 300 millimeters, because of the star tracker, again, I'm with you there. I stepped it back a little bit. We still haven't talked about our exact focal length used, but I know you didn't go full on 300, and I'm guessing you didn't do minimum 75 either, but you may have, because that's an interesting focal length. If you think about all the great images you've seen shot at 50, and just to go to 75, it was one I thought about shooting in.
I guess I can just sort of give it away. When I was thinking, Orion, Horsehead, and Flame, 75 is great. But I've just done that field so many times that for this challenge, I wanted to do something a little different, so I didn't do that. But 75 is just amazing or 75 to 85 is really good for getting all of the Orion's belt and the sword and everything in one shot.
It's interesting, you also said something that it excited you too, that you just haven't done several times before, because I mean, this time of year, there's some obvious choices to just go in and do the Orion Nebula and frame it up. That's almost like way too obvious. And I almost think that people would expect me to take that route, the crowd pleaser. I'm proud to say that I didn't. And I did something a little out of my regular repertoire for this one. And I hope that you and the audience appreciates the extra effort in how I was able to restrain myself from shooting the Orion Nebula. So it's not that one.
Well, another thing to think about it with object selection with a stock camera, not modified, is that it's not going to be as sensitive to the reds. So, but it's just as sensitive to blues and greens. There's not much green in space, but there's lots of actually interesting blue stuff in space. So blue reflection nebula, blue stars. So I think that, and it's just as sensitive to a lot of dusty stuff too. So another thing that I think a lot of beginners miss out on is if you go to a dark site, like I think both of us did, just with a stock camera, you can pick up dust, like that interesting brown dust with long exposures.
And that's some of my favorite stuff that you really need dark skies for. You don't need a modified camera for. So that went into the planning heavily too in the target that I chose. The idea that, anything that's heavy in hydrogen alpha probably isn't a great choice for this stock camera. That kind of leads you even closer to the type of object I shot. I also have a feeling that we might have shot the same thing based on your description, although maybe not. Eventually we're gonna have to show each other's images, and man, I've never been so scared to show one of my images and also excited to see someone else's. Just knowing like the whole challenge aspect of this thing. It's like nothing else I've ever done before in terms of a project.
Yeah, I don't know which I'm hoping for more. If we did shoot the same object, so then it would be like an interesting direct comparison, because we both did about 3 hours with the exact same gear, or different objects, just because I think it would be fun to show the audience 2 different objects that you could do with this gear, you know?
It's almost like a processing challenge because so much of it comes down to our processing skills and what we were able to do with this pretty, mediocre data you would consider compared to a more advanced rig.
Yeah. One of the things that, is hard to go back to a lens like this for me is I've gotten so used to StarNet++. I use it not only in like my narrowband stuff, but in a lot of my DSLR work. And basically what that does is it removes all the stars so you can then focus on nebulae in the field, boost those up, and then add the stars back in. The problem with a lens like this one is that the stars are so weirdly shaped, they're not perfectly circular, that when you use that StarNet process, it leaves these artifacts. And those are sort of hard to deal with.
Yes, I agree. Did you notice in the blue channel specifically, there was some, when I looked at the channel, I could see some dark rings around those blue stars that was like, oh, that's going to be fun to deal with.
One interesting thing about using this lens is that some zoom lenses have a focus lock. So basically it's just a little switch, just like autofocus or manual focus, but it just locks the focus position. This lens doesn't have that, so I can actually just push it like that. Let me get it better on camera here. I can just push the lens like that and it changes the focus position, right? So to prevent that, one thing I always have in my bag when I'm out shooting is electrical tape, and usually of a bright color like this so I can see it in the dark. And I just tape the lens. So I just tape it so that it can't move. And that helps in a couple ways. Another way that helps is once you tape the zoom position, then when you go to do flats, if you put something on your lens like I do, it again doesn't move. Because if you put a flat panel on top of a lens like this, it will just go right down. I too have a blue electrical tape that I keep in my little bag of gear stuff at all times for many reasons. Whether it's taping a power outlet in or something, you always need tape. And I knew that going in. I even wrote in my notes, tape the lens down, the focal length, because it doesn't take much to lose it. I totally forgot. I framed up my target, got the focal length that I wanted, did not tape it, continued to shoot for 3 hours, adjusting focus. All these situations where I could have easily knocked it out, got so lucky that I didn't. So as the battery was dying on that one bar left, I was like, oh, should I take a few more exposures or should I start taking darks right now? Temperature matched darks. As I thought about that, I knocked the focal length. I'm like, oh my God, like that's it. I'm done for the night because I've changed the focal length. There's no way I'll get it back other than eyeballing it to where it was. And I was like, wow, I could have really screwed myself because I didn't tape it. Yeah. And one thing about using a new kit for the first time and doing a real project and not testing, because like I'm such a tester, usually what I would do if I got a new lens or something is I would do test shots at different focal ratios to see how the star performance changed. And I didn't do that at all this time. So I was just flying blind thinking, okay, I'm just going to let in a bunch of light and see what happens. I will say I found out that I actually had used this lens. I sort of forgot about it because I must have sold it. But actually my first tracked deep sky photo was with this lens. So I got to show that to you because I think you'd get a kick out of it.
That's really cool. Yeah, because it is a kit lens. One of my first DSLRs came with it. And I actually tried to use it for nature photography, which if you can imagine a lens this slow at 300 millimeter in the daytime trying to capture a bird flying by, like it was the epitome of frustration. A lot of blurry photos of robins and birds that I saw around me. Yeah, it was a terrible lens for any type of nature photography.
That actually brings up a really good point. A lot of people think if they're coming from one style of photography to astrophotography that they know about a lens, Like they're like, oh, this is a great lens. They try it on for the stars and it sucks. You know, it's like there's often just no correlation between like this superb L glass lens for daytime and you bring it under the stars and there's just huge coma. You know, there's like all the stars turn into little seagulls and things, and you just have no idea till you test it. One thing I do like is that, you know, some lens makers are thinking about astrophotography now. I think maybe because we all sort of came and started buying their lenses, then they've now started marketing lenses to astrophotographers, which I think is cool. Like Rokinon does it a little bit, and Sigma too.
Cool. So I guess I could say the F ratio that I shot with, and so I stopped down to f6.3 on the 75 to 300 millimeter lens. How about you? Did you shoot wide open, or did you
I did,
stop
yeah.
down as well?
I shot wide open. Yeah. I mean, this might give another clue, but I wanted as many photons on this object as possible, and so I didn't want to stop down. And my style of processing, I know that I can deal with stars being a little wonky, so I'm less concerned about stopping down to get really good star performance, because I know that I'd rather sort of deal with it in post-processing, because I'm a very like heavy post-processor. I do a lot on the image.
That's a great point. So the settings that you choose, you know, others might say, well, you know what, I think it would be better if you did this, but it's like, well, no, based on my processing style, you'd rather sacrifice some star bloat for more photons on your sounding like a very faint deep sky object. That makes a lot of sense to me. I figured stopping down one stop might sharpen things up a little bit, because I was scared these stars were gonna be really, really bad. And I was pleasantly surprised at the fact that they were totally acceptable, especially considering this is a very budget lens.
Yeah, I find a lot of budget lenses, if you stop them down to, you know, telescope focal ratios like f5.6, f6, f7, they're pretty good usually. Mostly people are evaluating lenses based on like them being shot at like f2, f2.8, and that's just harder. You're not going to find many telescopes that can do that well.
So this is also funny and a little embarrassing too. So I've always said when I'm helping beginners, when they're dealing with focusing and framing, I say use your really exaggerated settings, crank up the ISO, widest aperture when you're focusing and framing, just to make it easier, let a lot of light in, and then adjust before you actually start shooting your object to something more like ISO 800 or 1600. I totally forgot to change the ISO back from 6400 cranked when I was framing and focusing my target, and shot all my exposures at ISO 6400. My theory of that is it probably isn't going to matter too much. A lot of people worry, I think, too much about ISO when it's not controlling the noise. The noise is controlled by the sensor characteristics. The ISO is just a gain multiplier on that. Now you do lose out on a little bit of dynamic range when you go to those higher ISOs, but I know this is getting technical, but you're not like actually adding the noise. You're maybe just seeing the noise. But you also see the noise in post-processing just by pushing an ISO 800 image up to the same exposure level. So I bet it in the end might not matter as much. I knew it wasn't a deal breaker and I could still work with the data, but if I could have gone back, I probably would have shot at ISO 1600, and I'm guessing that's probably around what you shot with.
I shot at ISO 800. I was really trying to, since this is a challenge, I was really trying to push what I could do with the Star Adventurer, and so I shot at ISO 800 5-minute exposures, and that's usually much longer than I would do on a Star Adventurer.
Oh boy!
But I was like, it's a challenge. I'm gonna see if I can do this. And you know, it worked out. That part of it at least worked out fine.
Oh boy, you went 5 minutes. My exposures were. Did I do 2 minutes or 3 minutes? I can't even remember now. It was either 2 or 3. I think it was 2 minutes, and I was happy with what I could see in an individual exposure on the back of that screen, which is pretty small and dim, by the way. I also had my screen brightness all the way down to save battery. So yeah, my exposures were 2 minutes, and that was because of the star tracker. Even with a great polar alignment, yeah, that a 5-minute exposure, especially if you were over 100 millimeters or 150, yeah, you really got to nail that polar alignment to see sharp stars in a 5-minute exposure.
It probably wasn't worth it, I gotta admit, like, because I spent probably 45 minutes fine-tuning my polar alignment, taking test exposures to try to really dial it in. And probably that 45 minutes would have been better spent just going with shorter exposures and getting it back in total imaging time, you know? It would have a cleaner image in the end. But I wanted to push it, and so it was okay.
Good for you. Yeah, respect for going 5 minutes on the Star Adventure. And I love it too, because a lot of people say, oh, it's not capable of that. And I've always said, I think it is if you've polar aligned really well. I mean, I've seen it. I've shot 5-minute exposures, even at 250 millimeters. I've done 4 and 5-minute exposures on a star tracker at that focal length. So I know it's possible, but that's ambitious to go for it on a night like when you have one chance, like we had.
One more thing I'll say about that is, if I felt any wind, I wouldn't have tried that. But it was a still night. It was deadly still, and so I was like, if I balance well, if I polar align well, and I just get away from the tracker so I'm not causing any movement, I think I can do this. So,
okay, I guess it's time to show you my picture. And
all right, I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now, and I'll just open up Photoshop first. So it's just going to, like a punch in the face, when I turn the screen sharing on, you're going to see this. Okay, screen share. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay. There.
Nice. Wow.
Did we shoot the same target?
Yes, we did shoot the same target.
Come on.
And we took very different takes on it, which I am so glad about. And yours looks amazing though, Trevor. This is really well done.
I appreciate that, and this is also my biggest fear, that we'd have a direct head-to-head comparison of my processing skills versus yours, because I know you're going to win that battle.
No. I just think they're just very differently. I went for a different scene, and I also tried to bring out the other stuff there that is I really shouldn't have, because my picture got so noisy because I was going after stuff that's actually even fainter than the witch head. The witch head is the brightest object in my scene, while you just focused on the witch head, which is actually much smarter. That's really what I should have done. So it's really just a strategy thing, and I think your strategy worked out better.
There are a lot of benefits to us shooting the same target, and it sounds like a different focal length. So do you care to guess what focal length I shot this at?
I'm going to guess 150.
About there. So I was going to do 150 right in the middle. I stepped it back to around 135 for the simple reason that when I did my research of kind of how I wanted to frame this up, there's a lot of great examples of the witch head shot at 135 using the Canon 135 and lenses like that. So at least with that framing, I kind of knew what I was getting into and how much detail I could pick up. So it was around 135, maybe 140, but of course I had no way of telling the exact focal length on that lens.
Sure.
And I did crop it in quite a bit.
Oh yeah. How much do you think you cropped?
I probably cropped about 20% in. I definitely prefer seeing the image at this magnification more than I do up close, because it gets pretty scary in there when you start looking too deep.
Sure.
One thing I really wasn't happy with was the way these yellow stars turned out inside the witch head.
Well, it's funny because I mean we always see someone else's image and we're like, oh, I wish I would have done it like that. Because to me, I saw this and I was like, oh, his has so much more punch than mine, and you know exactly where to look. I like the composition better. I like that I like the wide screen, because I went completely different with composition, and so it's one of those things where it's like whenever I see someone else's image, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done it that way. But
overall, the stars looked a lot better than I thought they would with this lens. And yeah, so there you go. That's why I chose this target, a reflection nebula, those really cool blues and the dust, all the things that it doesn't require an astro modified sensor. I haven't shot the Witch Head Nebula in I think like 9 years. When I showed my wife this for the first time and I said, this is what I shot last night. And she's like, that's it? Like, that's what you shot? Like, she's expecting to see a really beautiful like Rosette Nebula or something. And I was like, no, hopefully people appreciate how difficult this target actually is.
it's a hard balance because it's like, you know, I'm this exact same way. It's like, if you're trying to please astrophotographers, Witch Head is where you go, because it's like we recognize this is a hard thing. It's like a dusty reflection nebula. It's so dim that you can't see it in a single exposure. If you can, you could barely see it.
I'm ready to see your image now, and I still don't know what focal length you shot at or how you framed it, so I'm really excited to see it.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'll let you guess too. What focal length?
I think you shot it wider, probably maybe around like 85 or something like that would be cool. So I'm gonna guess about 85 millimeters. Was I close or going the wrong way?
I did 105. So I mean, but a different orientation of the sensor. Because one thing that I found also was I didn't use the ball head. What I did was I realized that this was going to be due south, basically. So all I had to do to get a vertical orientation was just rotate like this, and then it was square on with Rigel. I just got balance because this camera and lens is really lightweight for a telephoto lens. And so I could just get balance by pushing the counterweight all the way up here and pushing the whole declination bracket more towards the camera too. All right, you ready, Trevor?
I'm so ready. Oh, man.
There we go.
You did, okay, so Rigel almost near the center with all the surrounding dust, and you even got some of the red hydrogen from a stock camera pulled out of there.
Yeah, it's pretty noisy, but that's the tip of Barnard's loop. So Barnard's loop extends to Rigel basically, and then goes all the way up to almost Betelgeuse. It's this huge hydrogen bubble around the Orion constellation. And so I just think that getting a little bit of Barnard's loop in there is sort of cool.
I cannot, can you believe that we shot the same object?
It's insane, yeah.
Like, there's unlimited amount of targets in the night sky. I mean, to narrow it down to the bright stuff, I guess, but still, I just can't believe we shot the same target. So one thing it's interesting to see is that because your Rigel is closer to the center of the frame, that halo is more central, whereas it's hanging off the side in mine, which makes sense, right? Because it's near the center. So that's cool to see.
Yes, and actually that was in my plan, mostly just because I was like, okay, I know that the whole Witch Head is going to be in at 105 millimeter focal length if I just center Rigel. So then I knew that I could very quickly frame it up too. And I wasn't even thinking about the halo, but you're right. On a lens like this where you're going to have halos, if you can get the bright star centered and it works with your composition, then you'll have a very centered halo, and that I think it does look better.
So here's something I feel guilty about after seeing yours, is that clearly there's some signal in the area of Barnard's loop and the hydrogen, and in my photo that does include some of that area, it's just pure black. I just wiped it out. Because I'm like, I'm not dealing with that. I am knocking it down and pulling the Witch Head up. So yours, I think, is more natural looking overall. Mine's a little bit too dramatic. I mean, everything's to taste, But I think you know what I'm saying there. Yeah, like there's a little too much separation between the blackness and the brightness in mine, I think.
You know, I was definitely, when I got this, so I planned this to get all this stuff because I thought it's interesting how there's like weird blue and orange dust down here, which I've seen before. There's the red and this, so it sort of makes an interesting triangle around Rigel. But when I saw the data, I was like, oh, this was a mistake because it is so noisy, Trevor. So I had to do a lot of sort of like smoothing out and playing around with it to get it anywhere acceptable. And I still think, you know, if I zoom in here, let me see, it's like crackly blue stuff.
I mean, I think that, you know, we limited ourselves to Deep Sky Stacker, Photoshop, and StarNet if we needed it. But I really don't think that any techniques or, you know, using PixInsight or anything like that could have really done too much more to this data that we collected. We could have maybe smoothed things out a little bit more, but I mean, it is what it is. It was, you know, 3 hours of data of some faint nebulosity shot with a stock DSLR camera uncooled.
Yeah, and because we were both going from dark skies, you know, and I didn't have gradient issues either, so I didn't do any gradient extraction with this. I just took it out of Deep Sky Stacker, brought it in, balanced the color channels, and then went into processing.
I'm pretty impressed with you know, what both of us were able to achieve with this system in a limited amount of time, and it's really cool to see that we shot the same target but in a very different way.
Yeah, just I think both are definitely interesting pictures and very different takes on the witch head with the same gear. So because I think that, you know, something that I was getting worried about when we were I think we both sort of knew maybe we both shot the witch head, it just didn't when we were talking. And one thing I was sort of worried about is like, oh, is this going to be not that interesting because the pictures are going to look very similar? But actually they look pretty different, I think.
So I think part of what made this really exciting, this collaboration for not only us, but our fans, our audience, is just seeing two astrophotographers working together, and particularly ones that are on YouTube. Your channel recently hit the milestone of 50,000 subscribers, which, as you know, takes an incredible amount of work.
I become a better astrophotographer by trying out different things. I think that's one thing that a lot of astrophotographers maybe don't realize, is that this is about art too, and you are gonna learn a lot more by trying out different techniques, trying out different processes, and become a better astrophotographer. If your goal is like really elevated images, try out a lot of different things, because you know, if you just get stuck in a rut, all your images are just going to look the same and you're not going to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah, I felt that in this project we work on now, working on data like this. I felt like I had to, you know, really push the limits of my processing skills to do justice with this data. And through that exercise, I feel like I'm a better image processor overall. And that's just in this little project here. So I definitely agree with you on that one.
Well, it was so great to talk to you tonight, Trevor, and doing this challenge with you. I don't think that either of us think that one of us won because our images are so different, but maybe our audiences will have opinions about that. I'm sure they will.